Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Much Ado About Nutting, and with me today is someone who's going to get nuts with me, is my good friend Devin Baxter. Say hi.
Hello, folks. And you might say I'm nuttier than a fruitcake. Wrong squirrel, sorry.
It is? I hadn't noticed. I didn't realize there was a difference between Chuck Jones and Tex Avery. I didn't know. Just a few bits of info to get underway. So as mentioned, this is Much Ado About Nutting, released on the 23rd of May 1953. It's the 680th in the series and it's directed by Chuck Jones. You can find this on the Looney Tunes Gone Collection Volume 6 DVD set, and a HD version is out there as well, which is what I'm using for this review. Now, in case you haven't seen this one, it's under copyright, can't show you the full thing here on YouTube, otherwise the video will just get blocked. But in case you haven't seen it, very straightforward. A squirrel seeing a stand selling nuts. He eyes a few different kinds of nuts, but he sees the grand prize, a coconut. But how can he open it to get the goodies inside? We find out, don't we, Devin?
Absolutely. I love the animation of the squirrel here. Chuck was very proud of this cartoon. He was interviewed by Joe Adamson and Greg Fort and his colleague Richard Thompson, respectively, about the film. Quoting one of the interviews, quote, "We studied squirrels to find out how they work, what they did, how they moved. I put footage on the moviola and counted the number of frames that it would take for them to scurry, the little head turns and things like this. Then I would go ahead and do it." He talks about morphized animal action. Funny enough, only when the action calls for it, the squirrel will act like a real squirrel with the nervous tail twitching and the head turns when the truck comes by and things like that. And other times, he'll stand on his 2 feet, kind of like what Felix the cat used to do. There are times where Felix is on all fours like a real feline. Then other times, he stands on 2 legs as if, like John Kingmaker says, a man in a cat suit. So this would kind of be like a man in a squirrel suit. And John wrote that as well in the 100 Greatest Looney Tunes book. When I first saw this cartoon as a kid, it was on the Pepe Le Pew's Skunk Tales VHS from the Golden Jubilee series in the 80s. I rented a lot of those as a kid. I rented the Foghorn tape, the Daffy tape. I owned the Bugs tape. But sometimes what would happen is, to break the tedium of a more formulaic series like Foghorn or Pepe Le Pew, they would put in a one-shot in there. And in the case of the Pepe tape, they put in Much Ado About Nutting, which, by the way, for certain connotations, in hindsight, they should have titled it Much Ado About Nuttin', like N-U-T-T-I-N apostrophe, like I'm getting nuttin' for Christmas, that kind of thing. When I first watched it, upon seeing the squirrel, I noticed it resembled Chuck Jones's adaptation of Rikki Tikki Tavi. I watched that a lot as a kid, too. I watched that before this cartoon. So I saw this squirrel. I was like, oh, it's Rikki Tikki Tavi. I watched Rikki Tikki Tavi before I even knew who Chuck Jones was. I just saw the resemblance. And when I rewatched Rikki Tikki Tavi later and knew who directed it, that's when I had that eureka moment. That was when I started paying more attention to who was making these things. But I do love those introductory scenes establishing the squirrel's appetite, and especially when he licks his chops. It has like a nice xylophone effect that, again, reminded me of Rikki Tikki Tavi, because I think they did a lot of like little xylophone effects there as well. The only thing the squirrel doesn't do is rush into a scene and his tail comes back to him like a caboose, you know? That would have been nice.
One thing I want to mention about the title is that it is a pun on the Shakespeare play Much Ado About Nothing, in case you were wondering, and in case you fell asleep during English class when you would study Shakespeare plays and all that stuff. I mean, I don't particularly care for Shakespeare too much, if I'm being honest, but that's where it comes from at the very least. And yeah, this reminded me of Rikki Tikki Tavi for sure. I definitely saw this one first before Rikki Tikki Tavi, because I saw this on the Looney Tunes Gold Collection Volume 6 set, and I remember watching it, and I see it as, hey, this is actually a really good one-shot idea. It's a simple idea of this squirrel trying to get this ultimate nut, this coconut, and trying to open it, and this is one of the strongest coconuts in existence, apparently. By now, it should have broken at least from one of the things he tries to do, but I don't know. It's funny. It's a charming little short. It's not a go-to one. I don't have nostalgia for it, but it's good. I like this one. It's really nice.
It's a beautifully animated piece of pantomime filmmaking. Whenever Jones and Maltese do a pantomime film, not counting the Roadrunners and Coyotes, it's always beautifully done. Mouse Swarming comes to mind, for instance. Like, that's a nicely done cartoon and beautifully animated. And in animating weight, this little squirrel carrying this gigantic coconut, it's bigger than he is, the task and the nut itself. So a couple of production notes I have on this cartoon. Mike Barrier let me dates on when the jam sessions took place on certain Jones cartoons. Unfortunately, I don't have the actual jam session transcripts. They might be around somewhere, but I don't have them yet. So the jam session, which is in studio lingo for a story conference with all the directors and story men coming together with the stenographer taking notes, that took place April 30th, 1951. And there's another piece of documentation from, I believe, the Chuck Jones Creativity Center on Tumblr. They shared a production chart from the fall of 1950 to the summer of 1951. Going in production order, that would mean these would be releases from 52 to 53. So the animators would have 6 weeks to animate each production and then go on to the next one. And the most eye-opening thing about that document is that Dick Thompson and Abe Levitow are animating footage on pictures they were credited on. So according to Warner's Club News, Dick Thompson and Abe Levitow were promoted as full animators, and the jam session for What You Do About Nutting is in April 51. So that's one of the first productions that they worked on, but without credit. Didn't get credited until the Pepe Le Pew cartoon Wild Over You, which is the same year. It might have been because they didn't animate enough footage to allow for a screen credit, or they went to save money on paint to put their names in the credits. I don't know. It could have been anything. But my point is, there were 5 animators on the film and not 3, which are Ken Harris, Ben Washam, and Lloyd Vaughn. And What You Do About Nutting was released generally on May 23rd, 1953. But then I found small town theaters got to see cartoons before the general release, and even big city venues too. So it first played on May 1st at a small theater in Clinton, Illinois. So 3 weeks before the general release. And I have somewhat of an animator breakdown. Somewhat. I don't have everything. Because of the lack of dialogue, it's a little more difficult for me to determine some of the scenes, like Levitow's and Thompson's. I definitely cannot identify their scenes. They might have done small little things like the reaction shots that are probably like 5 feet, or the long shots where the squirrel's pushing the coconut. I don't know. So I believe Ken Harris animates that close-up of the squirrel licking his lips and coming down the tree and scurrying across the road. He looks at the peanut sign, and like all that sequence is Ken Harris, right up to when he sees the coconuts in that nice pose. That's just like, if it were a cartoon made today, he would have been like a squeal, like, oh my God, I found it. It's sort of the precursor to the opening scratch scene in the first Ice Age, where he tries to get the acorn. Ben Washam animates the scenes of the squirrel's attempts to bite into the coconut, and that doesn't work. Then he tries to break it, that doesn't work. He hits his foot, and then he rolls it up the tree twice, and it falls into the earth, not breaking at all. Then Lloyd Vaughn animates the squirrel hitting the coconut with the axe and then trying the jackhammer. But that's all I have. I couldn't really identify any other footage in the film. But the stuff like with the squirrel seeing different types of nuts, like peanuts, walnuts, Brazil nuts, then coconuts, that's all Ken Harris. There's some beautiful little touches here, like when he finds the walnuts and he kicks the walnut up with his 2 feet like a circus act. Another thing, too, I find fascinating about the short is that it's mostly original music by Carl Stalling. The only exception is in the opening with the famous The Fountain in the Park, which is better known as While Strolling Through the Park One Day. But then there's another little pun that Stalling inserts into the cartoon where there's sort of like a fanfare of the little tune Nuts in May. You know, here we go gathering nuts in May, which is one of those variants of here we go around the mulberry bush. So whenever the squirrel sees another kind of nut, it plays da 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 da. It's here we go gathering nuts in May. There's a great touch in the musical score when the squirrel puts back the coconut and Nuts in May is played in mocking tones like wah 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 wah, really emphasizing the trials and tribulations this little squirrel had to go through. His dreams are just dashed and he's just exhausted.
It's a charming little short. It really is. And the good thing is we can love the layouts, the music, animation, all that stuff, but thankfully it's also funny. And I think one of my favorite bits is just how this squirrel gets more and more greedy. Like he sees, okay, peanuts and it's like walnuts, and he even does that little circus move that you mentioned. Then he's like, nah, Brazil nuts are better. And he's absolutely in love. But then he sees the grand prize, the coconuts, like, oh, like it's just heavenly. It's like, oh my. And he does the obvious things at first. He tries to use his teeth, kick it, whatever. It starts off normal, right? But then the first time he does something which should crack it, and it would crack in real life, the rock breaks. I thought that was pretty funny. That was really great.
I love the reaction of the squirrel where he looks at the coconut, then he looks at the audience, then he looks at the coconut again in this very furious look, and his whiskers flare up like, oh, you.
Yep, he ain't happy, but he's persistent though.
The saw gag where he runs the saw blade through the coconut and all the saw teeth break. It reminds me of whenever Mo Howard would do the same thing to Curly Howard's dome and the saw would like bend and break.
Yes.
Because of his big melon head, you know.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and even up the tree, he pushes the coconut up the tree. And I liked, as you say, the showcasing of weight of this really heavy coconut versus this light squirrel. I mean, again, he's persistent, and sure enough, the tree doesn't work because it's the soft ground that it lands on, which I thought was a nice effect. I like that. This is some coconut, I can tell you that. And it's a smart squirrel too, because this squirrel can operate a jackhammer. I don't know how it knows how to do that. I don't know if you've ever tried to operate a jackhammer. I've tried it once during one of my jobs when I was doing some traffic control stuff, and they ain't easy. I can tell you that.
Oh, that gives me anxiety. I just imagine like the first thing it would be like, and it's like, that startled me a little bit. And then my teeth, and it's kind of like riding a horse and you have to just stay stationary when you go up and down, I guess. I don't know. Somebody in the comments below explained to me the proper way to operate a jackhammer. Not that I'll do it anytime soon, but better to have the info, I guess.
Sure.
One of my favorite layouts in the short, and this is one of the first ones that Maurice Noble did for Chuck. Beautiful color styling and layout throughout the entire thing. One of my favorite layouts is when the squirrel uses dynamite to try and open a coconut, and there's this nice shot with the squirrel holding the plunger about ready to push it down, in a way saying, if this doesn't work, nothing will. The determination is all right there. But then there's the real highlight of the film, which really impressed me as a kid, when the squirrel goes up all those steps of the Empire State Building Why the squirrel didn't use the elevator?
Yes.
Well, here's the thing. The long flight of steps makes for better staging and filming. Those nice fade outs and fade ins to the squirrel getting on top of this floor and that floor and that floor, and then goes all the way up to the observation deck. The coconut falls in the sharpest shell whistle sound effect I've ever heard in a Warner's cartoon, and the loudest crash sound. When I was a kid and I first saw that, I was really on the edge of my seat, like, how's this gonna turn out? And it always makes me laugh every time. Just the staging of it is just brilliant.
100%. And I like the fact the last gag there just takes such a long time to set up, which makes it even funnier, by the way, because Maltese would do this sort of stuff a lot. He would just set up these really long gags for a massive punchline. In this case, the coconut destroying a literal street. Causing all this damage. And I look at it going, wow, that escalated pretty quickly. You've gone from just a simple, oh yeah, we can't crack it open with a rock or anything, and now got the coconut destroying public property.
New York public property at that.
Oh man, that's hilarious.
New York is pretty empty in this cartoon. It's for the economics, like you don't really want to spend the time animating like a bunch of crowd scenes and things like that. Hell, in Gay Paris is pretty empty too. Oh, in His Bitter Half, that carnival is deserted for that same reason, to save money on actually animating people walking back and forth and all that. At that time, of course, too, the Empire State Building was the tallest building in the world until the World Trade Center in 1970. So that's the last attempt at trying to break this coconut. Like, it has to end there. If they remade this short or made a short similar to it, he would take a rocket up to space, up to the stratosphere, and drop the coconut down to Earth and see what happens there,
Well, Tex Avery would do that if he did this.
But yeah, I love the cartoon so much. It's one of my favorite of Jones's one-shots. Loved it ever since I was a kid.
But what do you think of the punchline? Because I thought it was really weird. I liked it, but it's just so strange that, okay, there's another coconut inside, which I thought was funny, but then you got that added shot of the coconut winking at the audience. I thought that was really bizarre.
It is a little bizarre. That's the first time I heard the sound effect in a Warner's cartoon. This is before I watched many of the pre-48 library on videotapes and on Cartoon Network. I didn't watch them on TNT or TBS. When you have more than one sibling, you don't really have control of the TV if you only have one TV.
So now our good friends Luke Perkins and John, they both really love this cartoon and they really want to say something about it, so why not? So first up, you're going to hear from Luke Perkins, and then you'll hear from our good friend John. So, first up, take it away, Luke.
Didn't expect me to pop up again quickly, huh? I just couldn't miss this one, even if I have a very sucky schedule that I don't take advantage of. So, yes, Much Ado About Nutting, the 1953 short by Chuck Jones. Oh yes, I love this one. This one is a particular favorite of mine, mainly as an animator, and I'll get to that in a moment. First off, let's talk for a few small seconds about the title. Yes, haha, nutting has a different meaning now, but it makes it even more funnier when you consider that with it being a play on Much Ado About Nothing by Shakespeare, that title is also a double entendre. The Hit Critic brought that up in a review of this short. There are some wonderful layouts in this one, courtesy of Maurice Noble and Philippe Digard. Philippe Digard in particular is very underrated, and I don't really think he gets talked about much. I love the staging of the sequence with the squirrel going through all of the nut carts in particular. You have some really nice use of carnival colors here and there, and also some interesting staging to make the nut cart look very big, while the squirrel is very small, which I think looks really, really neat. Now let me get into my animator instincts for this one as to why I love this one in particular. The animation of the squirrel itself is probably one of the best interpretations I've seen of the squirrel in anything animated ever. The way Chuck's animators like Ken Harris, Ben Washman, Lloyd Vaughn were able to take what is actually a very well observed take on a squirrel in terms of animal design and then stylize it for animation in a way that still stays true to the way a squirrel actually moves. Also being able to stylize it for some very good potential comedy without really having to resort to typical anthropomorphism, which is really amazing. You'll probably get what I mean when I bring up the anthropomorphism, but there is actually a bit of anthropomorphism in this one, particularly mainly due to sometimes in the poses that would pop up in a few seconds, like the squirrel pondering on how to crack the coconut, or the weird ways the squirrel would use these like props like a saw or that weird drill thing. Now, you could definitely argue that there was animation in the past that had animators study for accurate movement, but to also make it work for animation, like with Disney's Bambi back in 1942, which is actually one of my favorite Disney movies, by the way. But this one in particular wows me a lot every time I watch the animation in this one. If you ever see videos of squirrels on Instagram, and then you watch this short back-to-back, you can really tell that Chuck and his team did their homework. From the way they run around in quick speed, to that tail that shakes every once in a while, to even how they would stand up from time to time, that little nose wiggle the squirrel does, etc., etc., etc. It's very well done, but it also has that special stylization factor in the character design that allows for the squirrel to work in animation. It may look like a stylized squirrel, but this squirrel definitely isn't walking around like Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, but is actually acting like how an actual squirrel would. I also say this because a while back, I watched a 1954 Donald Duck short called The Flying Squirrel, directed by Jack Hanna. Now, I'm usually very nice about those classic Disney shorts from the 30s to the 50s, but my God, let me just say, you see one Donald versus small, cute animal cartoon, you've basically kind of seen them all. Even with the design of the flying squirrel, like look at it. It may look like one, but doesn't it seem suspiciously to have looked like another cute nemesis that Donald fought against in other cartoons? Just gonna have you think about that in a while. Okay, back to Nutting Cartoon. I love just how far the squirrel goes to try to get the coconut cracked by starting it off with a bunch of like these random objects that are around a park or through a construction place, like with the dynamite and such, and then taking the coconut to a building, going all the way upstairs to the top, which actually reminded me of that sequence in Cinderella with the mice trying to get the key to Cinderella. But then when the squirrel gets to the top of the building and drops down to the ground, hoping just anything would happen. When a coconut gets down to the ground, a part of the road is basically destroyed thanks to the coconut falling, adding to its absurdity. Then there's the punchline that kills me, in which the squirrel puts the coconut back to the cart, and then it falls from its original location, causing it to crack. And it may seem like that he finally has something to eat, but then it opens to reveal another coconut inside, much to the squirrel's dismay. This one has some fantastic facial expressions too, with some of the takes of the squirrel seeing the coconuts for the first time, to a shock at the coconut revealing another coconut at the very end. Again, Chuck and his crew, they were absolute masters of pantomime. And it really does feel that Chuck's experience from the past of seeing Chaplin performing on set, it's really like truly paying off. And yeah, that was what I was talking about with Mouse Warming a while back, how good they really were at pantomime and being able to show something without any dialogue and being able to make a plot that's easy to follow and really funny as well. Oh, I also want to bring up, look at the eyes of the squirrel in particular. They're also very well thought out and also very accurate if you look at the squirrels in real life. Like, the white part of the eye, that's usually the iris, that the white part is actually the pupil. and it's like insanely accurate, as I said before. But yeah, I really, really, really love this short a lot. It's funny, it's well animated, it's got a very well observed take on a squirrel, it's an animator's favorite, and it's one of my favorite Chuck Jones shorts and one of my favorite Looney Tunes ever, basically. And I would definitely immediately give it like a 10 out of 10. I really, really wanted to talk about this one, and I'm really glad I'm able to talk about it here. Take care.
And now, take it away, John.
Hello, it's me again, John, and today I'm gonna give my quick thoughts on Much Ado About Nothing. So, the first time I ever watched this cartoon was once I purchased the 6 Golden Collection way back in 2018-2019, and it was among many of the Warner shorts I had never heard of or seen. And after watching the first time, I really enjoyed this little one-shot that Jones and his team came up with. I really like that the whole idea of the short is that there's no dialogue and it's just being focused on a small series of gags of this squirrel trying to break a coconut. One of the many highlights I like is the animation and the squirrel's design, which in contrast to other cartoon characters, it looks somewhat more realistic but at the same time cartoony. For example, if you compare it with another squirrel character than before, Screwy Squirrel, you notice the difference. With Screwy being more cartoony, meanwhile the squirrel in this short is more realistic itself. It's just a little thing I noticed. Another thing that I enjoy is the backgrounds, which is something I really like of many of the 50s Jones shorts. When the backgrounds are pretty vivid and with great angles in them, like they look something out of a painting. But yeah, and another part I really liked is also during the ending, after the squirrel finally isn't able to break the coconut winks to the camera. I found that pretty funny, like seeing the coconut coming alive just for that. But yeah, overall I really like this little one-shot cartoon. And one thing that shocked me was to see this squirrel character in Looney Tunes back in action, which makes a small cameo in that feature. But overall, I really enjoyed this little Chuck Jones one-shot. I will give it, I think, an 8 or a 9 out of 10. I'm not sure what was my ranking for this one. But it's a pretty fun and enjoyable cartoon I recommend you. And that's all that I have to say about this cartoon. I'll see you all in the next video.
If I were to give this short a rating, I would probably give it a 9.5. Yeah, absolutely one of my favorite of Jones's one-shot cartoons. It could have fallen apart under the wrong hands, this very simple story. I really think about that all the time. What if Freeling did this with Warren Foster? Or what if McKimson did this with Ted Pierce? Or at another studio like MGM or Terry Toons?
Oh, Terry Toons, yes. But in terms of rating, yeah, I'll give it about a 9. I think it's a very charming short. The only reason I wouldn't give it a higher one is that I'm not too nostalgic for it and it's not a go too short. But if you're an animation student, this is one to study. You can see lots of great animation principles in full effect here. You got the weight principle, timing, layout. It's all here. This is pretty much animation school, really. Definitely check this one out if you're interested in learning how to effectively animate characters, for sure. So that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, don't try and crack a coconut.